Today we're going to be talking about bluefin tuna fishing, and in this episode we're going to be talking about how to fly line. And the reason why we're going to be talking about that is because it's probably what you're going to be doing the vast majority of the time when you're actually on the sport boats trying to catch bluefin tuna. We are at Fisherman's Access in Brea, and I'm with my friend Noah, as well as Anthony, and some of you guys might know him from some of our old videos. Yep. As I said over and over again, we talk about it all the time, is about the importance of just supporting your local shop. This is a really, really good one. But more than anything, support your shop, whether it's here or somewhere else. It's really the backbone of our fishing industry. And so, we're all about just supporting whatever can continue to help this fishing industry thrive. We're gonna jump right into it. Anthony, if you can give us an introduction to what fly line fishing is, and then kind of take us away.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're gonna be covering is fly lining. That's just gonna be the act of hooking a bait on and tossing it out and let that bait swim in the current naturally and try to get a bite that way. What we want to do is we want to match up a line and a hook to the specific bait, and we want to base those off the quality of fish that we're seeing. So if we get out to the kelp patties and we're seeing our Dorado, our yellowtail, our smaller grade yellowfin, we want to take something like that 20, 25 or 30 pound test fluorocarbon. We want to tie on a hook that's appropriate to the size of bait in the bait tank. We have the variety of different fluorocarbons, we have a variety of different hooks, and we're going to match those up to the bait that we're using, and we're going to match that up to the fish that we're targeting. You're then going to look in the bait tank and you're going to see what size bait is in there, and we're going to put a hook on. I recommend when you're leaving the dock, check out the bait after they've loaded up the bait. If you're on the boat and they're loading the bait, wait till they're done and then kind of look. You can usually see the dead ones starting to come up to the top. Gives you a pretty good idea. If you're not sure how to tell, ask the crew. They'll pull one out, they'll show you, they can teach you how to hook and everything on the boat as well, but we're gonna try to cover as much of that here tonight. If you're starting off with like a 20 pound setup, or if you have multiple setups and you wanna do 20, 25, and 30, you're gonna wanna look at the bait, put your appropriate size hooks on, and I always recommend starting in the morning with the heaviest line that you can. So if you have your 30 pound, start with that. If you're not getting bit, drop to 25. If you're still not, then drop to 20. But I don't recommend starting at 20, finding out they're bigger fish or they're eating everything and you're breaking off and you're losing out on that opportunity at what might be your one and only stop for the day. So really to maximize it, I like starting with that 30 on my offshore kelp patty stuff. Owner has an incredible selection of hooks. They cover anything that we need to do in Southern California really well. There's a ton of other hook brands out there. Sometimes you might have a hard time finding a certain size of an Owner hook, so you have to find it in a comparable brand. What I do recommend is that if you have a hook that's working well, or don't get caught up on the sizes, if you have a hook that's working well and you have it with you, compare it to the other hooks that are in the store if you need to, and make sure, like say if you're looking at a Gamakatsu, maybe they run a little bit smaller than an Owner. So instead of getting a number 4, maybe you need to get a number 2. That way you're not going too small. I will say that all the hook brands, the sizing is a little bit different. It's not universal. So make sure that you're matching up the size of your favorite hook to the size that's there, not necessarily just the numbers. There's a few other options such as ringed or non-ringed. That's going to be personal preference for a lot of it. If you're fly lining and the bait maybe is a little weaker, it's the summer, the water's warm, that ringed bait will give it a little bit more action. If you're not as comfortable with picking the bait out of the hand well and pinning it on and you tend to beat it up more, that little bit of extra action in the current with that ring will help. You'll hear both sides of that. Some guys will tell you, I never use ring. Some guys swear by ring. It's completely up to you. Check them both out. I usually have both in my arsenal. If I see really weak bait, I do like to fish the ring. If I have really good strong bait, the rings are usually more expensive. I go to just a more basic hook without the ring.
As Anthony has given us an incredible introduction to bluefin fishing, he mentioned kelp patties, he mentioned yellowtail, Dorado. Fly lining, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're talking about right now applies to whatever species you're targeting, whether it's kelp patties or just offshore, open ocean, finding schooling bluefin. It's the same exact thing. And then also, as he talked about hook sizes, we're going to be talking primarily about the 20 to 30 pound setups. And again, if you watched the first episode of this series, we talked about 30 pound setups, 40 pound setups, so on and so forth. So you want to match up your rod and reel to the appropriate size setup of hook that you're using with the fluorocarbon. Yeah, so just wanted to throw that in there and then hopefully not get slapped by Anthony.
No, that's good. The other thing that we want to point out is the circle versus J hook, okay? So typically when we're fishing our bluefin, they bite and they run. So that circle hook is really, really effective for those because it clotheslines them in the corner and it really, really sticks well. They're typically not chewing on the line anymore because it is stuck in the corner, so you increase the odds of landing that fish. With the J hook, I typically like J hooks with yellowtail a little bit more. They don't have the same teeth, so if you do hook them down in the gut or in the top of the mouth, that's more than fine. They're not gonna bite you off. So I do like the fact that like say a number 1 J hook versus a number 1 circle hook, there's a lot less material on a number 1 J hook. So for finessier presentations, or maybe those yellowtail or Dorado are really keyed in, they're really studying your line, your hooks, it does make a difference if you have a smaller hook, a smaller profile, nothing sticking out of the bait, no extra jewelry as I like to call it, that number 1 can be effective. So I definitely recommend having a variety in your box and being able to adapt to what you're seeing. If you're seeing a lot of fish on the kelp patties, but they're just not biting, figure out how to downsize without necessarily going down to an absurdly low fluorocarbon leader. You know, so that might be just switching out from a simple circle hook to a J hook in the same size, or even downsize.
Anthony, if someone wanted to have all the bases covered as much as possible to accommodate for big bait or smaller bait, what size hooks do you recommend from this lineup?
For 90% of what we do in Southern California for our offshore fly lining, it's gonna be a number 4 to a 2.0. That's gonna get it all done. You don't have to have every single size, so we don't have to go 4, 2, 1, 1.0, 2.0. I like to skip sizes when I'm getting my hooks, you know, because it does, everything adds up. If you would like to have every single size, go for it. But typically if a number 2 is working, a number 4 will work. Typically if a number 4 is working, you know, that's my favorite size for the bluefin, the finessier presentation with the circle hook. You can kind of skip the number 2 and go to a number 1. And when you hold all 3 of those hooks up to each other, you'll notice a small difference, but not a giant difference. So you can go from a 4 to a 1, and that way if you do have to upsize your hook because it's a slightly bigger bait, that's gonna work well. And then from there, I like to go to like a 1.0 or a 2.0. That's gonna be for a big mackerel or even a bigger bait maybe the tuna are a lot bigger and you need a heavier duty hook so that's not gonna bend out or break. So that's where we'll bump up to like a 2.0 to withstand that pressure. Maybe 150 pounders are biting during the day, they're eating 80 pound, and we don't want to do it on a tiny little number 4 circle hook, so we'll bump up to a 2.0.
So yeah, so we covered the hooks, thanks so much, and then what do you want to talk about next?
So fluorocarbon is another daunting thing to go by because there's so many options now. There's different brands, even within the same brand. I mean, this is Seagar. There's 3 different color labels here, and you're like, oh, which one's the best? I don't know. A lot of us don't have the research or even know that these options are out there till we get to the shop, and then it's overwhelming because we just got done looking at all the hooks, the rods, the reels, and now we're trying to figure out what fluorocarbon. A lot of the fluorocarbons will have descriptions on them about what their properties are. Not all fluorocarbon is the same. Leader fluorocarbon is typically a little stiffer, better abrasion resistance than say a filler fluorocarbon, which is designed to fill a reel for maybe say freshwater bass fishing. So we typically are using bite leader fluorocarbon when we're out fishing our offshore fly lining setups. Say Seagar Blue Label will be their thicker, more abrasion resistant line. But with that, it's going to be a little bit stiffer. So if we're fly lining and the fish are being a little finicky, we might want to downsize to either like their green label or their gold label. The green label is kind of their intermediate in diameter. They will have all the same breaking strengths listed on them, but this one is going to be a little bit softer. It's going to be a little bit thinner, so it's going to break a little truer to what it says and a little less abrasion resistant. So if you're fishing yellowtail, it's a great option. If you're fishing tuna, you might want to bump up to the blue label, but if the blue label is too stiff, you might have to switch over to this one. So it gets a little challenging. We don't need 100 options in there. There are some other good fluorocarbons. If you want their thinnest, softest line for the pickiest bites, their gold label does a really good job. Daiwa came out with an incredible fluorocarbon, great price, made in Japan. It's got great properties. So you're gonna fish a fluorocarbon, you're gonna get bit, you're gonna build a lot of confidence in it. Find out what your local shop is recommending at the time and kind of trust them and kind of go with it. But they all work really well. If you're fishing around like calicos or yellowtail around the kelp, I definitely recommend something more like the blue label. If you're fishing offshore, it's a lot more open water, less to get hung up on. Definitely a thinner, softer line will be pretty effective.
Awesome. And would it be correct, either of you, like one thing I've learned is like sometimes I see people go as low as 20 even when we're chasing some of these schooly bluefin tuna, sometimes even lower when they're being super finicky. For me, like initially I always thought that was because the visibility was less. What I think now, and I'm not sure, is the thinner line allows the bait to swim a little bit more freely. Or is it a combination of both?
So everything that creates drag on the bait fatigues the bait, right? So if the less drag you have on the bait, so if it's a thinner, softer line, He doesn't have to fight the line to keep swimming. So yeah, that is something that can definitely help with that.
Okay, so this is awesome, and we're gonna get into the nuts and bolts here. We're gonna, show you some options for how to hook a bait, but let's talk about some knots real quick.
Yep.
And then we'll dig into some other stuff. I got a lot of questions on this. So really quickly, with the braid to fluoro, can you demonstrate a braid to fluoro connection knot that you would like to tie? Just briefly, so people can have an idea. Demonstrate that for us. Maybe Noah, can you do a demonstration of your favorite connection knot?
So we're going to demonstrate a knot here between the polymer line and the braid. So whether you're fluorocarbon or mono, they're very similar in what kind of knot you're tying. Very similar properties. The monofilament typically has a lot more stretch to it, and it's not as clear. So what happens with the fluorocarbon is designed for the light to pass through it. It gets distorted a little bit, but the easiest way to describe it is the light will actually go through it, so it's not as visible. Whereas a monofilament will typically reflect the light, so it's definitely a lot shinier underwater, so that it's easier for the fish to pick up on. But the monofilament does have stretch, and it is probably one of the most affordable lines on the market. Braid is a lot more expensive per yard, but it does have a much longer shelf life and there's no stretch to it. So with that, you get a much lower abrasion resistance. So if this nicks a rock, it's gonna break a lot faster than say a monofilament. But it is a lot thinner, and because there's no stretch, it is a lot more sensitive. You can feel your bait swimming a lot better, you can feel fish biting it a lot better, and when you do set the hook, it typically gets that hook buried in there a lot faster. So a lot of benefits to it. It is something that allows you to have a lot more line on the spool as well, because it is so much thinner. This is a 20-pound mono, and we have a 40-pound braid that we're gonna connect. The 40-pound braid is much thinner than the 20-pound mono. So just for a reference there, doubling the strength and you're still getting a thinner diameter. So that's really great for the line capacity on these smaller reels that we're going over. So
awesome.
Noah's gonna teach us a knot real quick on how to connect these. There's a ton of names for the same knots a lot of times, which makes it really confusing.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some really good knots out there. The best knot for you is the knot that you know. If you know a knot and you tie it well and you've had good success with it, it's almost better to stay with that knot. Practice your new knots at home, or if you see something exciting, practice at home, test at home, really put it on a drag scale and put a lot of pressure on it, and make sure you're comfortable with that knot before you start tying it in a hot bite, trying to go off of memory and messing up a whole trip. So if you know the knot, that's the best knot for you, but it's okay to learn, but practice at home.
All right, so the knot I'm gonna be tying is gonna be called the RP knot. It's also known as the Alberto John Collins knot, Albright knot, kind of like what Anthony said. It's gonna be all same knot, 7 different names. So first I'm gonna take my leader line. I'm gonna make a loop. I'm gonna take my braid, I'm gonna put it under, feed it in a little bit. Then I take my middle finger, pushing up against my mono. And then as I'm wrapping my braid around, I'll go about 7 times. I made some windows between this line. I'm gonna pinch the top of it now. I'm going back through these windows that I created. I'm going back 7 times. And then I'm gonna go in, we came in through the bottom, I'm gonna go out through the top this time. So I'm pushing it through, pushing my line tight, looking that all the windows are interconnected. Then I'm gonna lube it. Then as I'm cinching it, I'm making sure that they're staying within the windows that I created. I'm also gonna push down on the knot and then cinching at the same time. I'm gonna push all tag ends down, and then to finish it, I'll pull my 2 main lines, and then after that I can also pull my tag ends as well. Just making sure it's as cinched as possible. Then after that I'm gonna trim my 2 tag ends. If you're doing a couple cranks to your fluorocarbon, I'll cut my tag end a little short, just because you don't want this knot and you don't want the tag ends to be going through your guides. It's gonna kill your casting distance and it's gonna kill the momentum of that bait. So cut it pretty short. You could leave that braid tag in a little bit longer. It's not gonna affect it. But that mono or fluorocarbon, you cut it pretty short so it's not hitting the guides.
Awesome. So yeah, I actually put these guys on the spot, so Anthony's a little upset at me. I mean, I put Noah on the spot first time on film and asked him to tie a knot, but you did a great job. Again, just wanted to demonstrate how you would do a connection knot. And most important thing is to actually practice it. If you're not good at it, don't worry. You can go on the sport boats. The deckhands that's what you're paying them to do. So they'll tie the knots for you. But if you want to become self-sufficient, it's kind of good practice. So just want to demonstrate that as a sample. So thank you so much, Noah. And anything you want to add?
Learn your knots at home, practice at home, and a hot bite, the deckhand's priority is to get the fish. So if you're standing there waiting to get a hook tied on or get your connection tied and they have to gaff, that's their priority. The guy on the bait tank throwing bait, that's his priority. So know your knots, go on that boat with some confidence in your knots, and be able to retie yourself when there's a hot bite going. That's the best advice I can give you when it comes to your knots.
So at this point, we've tied our connection knot. We're probably like heading out to the fishing grounds.
Yep.
How long of a leader should we use?
So typically when you're setting up your leaders, you don't need much more than 3 feet or so. I typically don't like the connection. Noah brought up a great point, and this is why I don't like it. I don't like the knot typically going through the guides on my rod and having that transition of line going through. But it's completely up to you. If you get in a finicky bite or if you need a longer shot of fluorocarbon to help sink the bait out, it's okay to do that. So there's sometimes you'll see me fishing on a 10, 15 foot leader of fluorocarbon just to have a much bigger window. And there's times where you'll see me fishing down to like a 3 foot section. If it's a hot bite, maybe there's gonna be a lot of tangles. Fluorocarbon's pretty expensive. I don't wanna be breaking off 10 feet at a time if yellowtail are going every which way, creating some macrame underwater. I really wanna, like if that gets broken off, it's okay. I'm gonna tie on a new 3 foot shot, tie on a hook, and get right back to work. If you're bluefin fishing and they're a little better grade, I like to do a little longer leader. If they do happen to bite you off, or if you do get a good one to the boat, they gaff it, they bring it in, I run my fingers over that fluorocarbon. If I feel any bumps, I stop right there, I cut it, cut the hook, and retie. I like to have a little extra fluorocarbon on there so I can retie that hook without having to do multiple knots just to get me back in the water. Because that's a fast way to just like, I'll risk it, and then you go again and you lose a good fish. So if you don't want to tie that braid knot and then you risk it because you don't have enough fluorocarbon to retie, it could end bad. So on the bluefin, I typically do a little bit longer leader. On my yellowtail, my Dorado, I typically just do a 3 foot section, nothing fancy.
Okay. I don't want to jump too heavy into a rabbit hole, but I'd love your thoughts on this regarding Flyline. I've seen some guys that are into having their braid to a long monofilament, and then with the little bite leader of fluorocarbon.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that? And how viable do you think that is as opposed to what we're demonstrating today?
So that's a great question, and there is 10 recipes to get the same thing done. So based on how heavy of a drag you're fishing, how your rod is, what your preferences are, do you swing really hard when you set the hook, or do you wind into them with a circle hook? So just based on your style of fishing, there are things that can definitely benefit you as an angler. If you're going with a really stiff rod, a tight drag, you might want to have that 100 foot of mono in there to add some stretch and forgiveness so you're not breaking off as much. Typically, I'm fishing straight braid to a fluoro leader. I am compensating for that by not over pressuring my drag. That way I don't have, there is some forgiveness there in the drag, but I'm still fishing a decent drag. I'm also keeping my rod. Most of my rods are not super stiff, so there is some action in the rods that'll also give you a little bit of cushion. And then the other thing that benefits, if you hook into a better fish, he's making a good run, I'm not sitting there pulling up hard on it where I'm putting a lot of pressure. I'll drop the rod tip pointed at him and let him get a good run in and tire himself out, letting the drag of the reel do some of that work. And I might keep a little bit of pressure on that rod where there's a bend, but I'm not pulling all the way back up and putting a ton of pressure on there. So let him tire himself out, and usually they run in a straight line, and they tire themselves out. And once they do, then I'll start working that fish in. So yes, you can do the mono. There's no right or wrong answer to this. There's some guys that swear by one thing, some guys that swear by another thing, but you're gonna develop those preferences as you go. Based on who you talk to, they'll set you up one way, and that's usually how you kind of stick with it. But try a variety of things till you're happy. But personally, I'm using the braid to a fluorocarbon leader.
Awesome. Noah, what about you? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, personally, I just fish all braid, and I'll do a couple cranks of fluorocarbon just for like the benefits Anthony said. Just in case if I catch a fish, there's a little bit chafe in the line, cut it out, get back to fishing. I mean, I'm paying a lot of money to go on these boats. I want to maximize my time in the water as much as possible, and I don't want to go home skunked.
Yeah. I think, again, for me, as I continue to go on these sport boats and fail. As I try to learn this, the one thing that I learned here, and we're going to jump into this now, is maybe the most critical aspect of getting bit is picking the right bait and hooking that sardine before you injure it.
1000%. I mean, that is hitting the nail on the head. Once you have your gear dialed in, we covered rods, we covered reels, we covered fluorocarbon, we covered hooks. Now it comes down to bait selection and bait handling. You go on a boat, almost every single trip, you're gonna see the guy that hooks the bait through the nose, and then he's got that bait in a death grip after it's already hooked, and he walks over to the rail, and when he throws it over, his hand has more scales than the fish does. That bait is not gonna look appetizing. That looks like a cheeseburger that you just dragged across the parking lot, and then somebody's trying to give it to you to eat. That does not look appetizing. So really it comes down to bait handling and pulling the bait out of the live well. So when we're picking our baits up out of the bait tank, it's really important to not stress them out. You know, we don't want to have all the red noses from them beating into the side of the bait tank while you're trying to chase them around. You see the guys that go in there and just start digging around. We don't want to do that. You want to go nice and slow, approach the bait cautiously, really key in on a bait before you just start digging around in there, because you don't want to just chase whichever one you get first, because that's usually the weakest one. So key in on a bait that looks good from above. Take your hand, usually go from underneath, kind of herd them into the corner, and then shallow it up. So you kind of block them in, get underneath the bait, and then pick it up. Once you pick the bait up, you don't want to just limp hand it, because that's how they go flying everywhere. You really want to get the bait up, and then you want to pinch it and kind of hold it firmly, but don't squeeze the crap out of it. You just want to hold it nice and firmly so that you could put the hook across the nose, and then as soon as you hook it, you want to let go of that bait. That's the most important part of this, right? Once you pick the best bait in the bait tank, but then you hold on to it for dear life all the way back to the rail, we have killed that bait. It is now not effective. So you really want to just hold it by the line, walk over the rail, drop it over the side, and then make your cast. The other technique is going to be trying to catch that bait fish with the bait fish facing this way in your hand. That's going to be for the butt hooking. That's where we're going to hook it down here on the stomach. Noah's going to demonstrate that with a hook and how placement and all that here in a second. But you really want to get that fish facing this way. Again, you're going to go in nice and slow, get underneath the bait you want, pick it up, spread your fingers, get that hook in there, and again, let go instantly. With the butt hook, it's typically a lot easier for them to fall off, so you want to just take your time, walk over the rail, make a nice easy underhand lob, and get that bait away from the boat. What I see a lot of times, guys drop their bait in the water, and the line starts going out. And they're like, oh, my bait's swimming because the line's still going. Well, if you're on the right side of the boat, the wind in your face, the current is going to be taking your bait away from you. Your boat's going to be drifting one way. Your bait's just going to be sitting there. It could be dead, creating drag, and enough drag and more drag as there's more and more line getting off the reel. So that bait will eventually start going faster and faster. What you really want to feel is the vibration in your rod tip from that tail kicking. If you're not feeling that vibration, your bait is sitting there not swimming. So typically what I do, a key thing with the fly line, you get your bait in the water and it stops swimming. It's just sitting there relaxing in the water with a big old hook hanging out of them. Take your finger and walk back on your spool a little bit, real gently, walk back, and if that fish darts off again, let it run. If it doesn't dart off and you're walking back and it just kind of like comes in real lazy back to the boat, that's not a good bait. It could be the best looking bait, but if it does not want to swim, get rid of it and get yourself a new bait, one that wants to swim. So they're the little tricks to making sure that you're capitalizing on your fly lining opportunities. Noah's going to demonstrate exactly where to hook the bait and how to hook them.
Can't really stress this enough, but taking that extra 10-15 seconds to actually look at a bait and get something that's aware, not bashing its nose in the tank, I mean, it makes all the difference. So, caught my bait. First I'm going to be doing a nose hook. Like I said, gently holding the bait. And then at the tip of the nose, there's going to be almost like a clear part through the cartilage. And then all I'm doing is just gently putting it through. It's going to be through that cartilage. And after that, after I'm done hooking it, I'm going to be holding my line, like Anthony said, drop it over the rail and cast. On that butt hooking technique, you're going to grab it. And then on the sardine, there's going to be these two anal fins. After that, on top of these anal fins, there's going to be like a little soft cavity. I'm going to push it through that soft part, like that, and then casting it over. It's going to swim down and out from the boat with the hook like this, and then hopefully I get bit.
So your nose hook is typically going to help keep your bait up on top of the water. If you see a lot of crashing fish, or if you're fishing a kelp patty where the fish are sitting right under it, you want to keep that bait nose hooked and swimming up towards the surface. If we're fishing bluefin, the captain's saying he's marking fish down below us and all around us, but we're not seeing them crash around, the butt hooked bait will be more effective. And like Noah said, the little fin down here, the anal fin, that hook you want right behind there. And what that's going to help do is create a little structure point where the hook doesn't just rip out real easy. If you go too far behind it or too far forward of it, the hook falls out really, really quickly, or with very little pressure. So if you want to have a shot at making a little bit of a cast with that bait, try to utilize that fin and the anchor point of that fin into the bodies to keep your bait on.
So at that point, Anthony, if you can show us how you want to be holding the reel, and what you want to be doing, and then say that you do get bit, or what that experience is like, and what do you do next?
Yeah, so that's typically a little easier with the rod too. But you're holding the rod and reel. You're going to be kind of palming your reel and the rod. This thumb is typically ready to go for strike, whether it's a star drag or a lever drag. This thumb is ready to engage it in gear and then lift up and set that hook, or if it's a circle hook, you just lift up and kind of keep that pressure there with a little oomph. You don't want to set the hook, but you do want to lift up and make sure it's in there. As your bait's running, it's going to be pulling the line off it, and you should feel the erratic little dart and stop, dart and stop. Those little darts are what trigger the bite response from these fish. So if you're getting that, you're doing really good.
So when you do engage, say your line does start shooting out and you're bit, should there be like a waiting period? Should you count to 3, or?
Based on the size of bait, if you have smaller bait like this, it's typically not much of a wait period. They're typically going to eat it. But if we're catching smaller yellowtail or really small yellowfin, maybe wait, a 2 or 3 second count, make sure they got some line off, and then let them have it. That way because sometimes they'll bite it and just hold on, but they haven't really got the hook and they haven't finished swallowing it. So sometimes that 1, 2, 3, gotcha. If you're working with bigger baits, you might want to up that count or really exaggerate that 3 count. But a lot of times you get that feel, once that line's coming off nice and steady, you're like, oh, I'm bit. Then you just click it in gear and go.
Okay. So, and then also when you go in to engage, obviously with the lever drag, do you want to go all the way to strike? Or?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So is there any point where you back off, or do you keep it?
If you have your drag set properly, you shouldn't have to back off at all during a fight. You set your drag based on the leader. So if you're fishing 20-pound leader, you might want to have 5 to 7 pounds of drag on there. So if you have set it properly, you could put that up in a strike and just let that fish tire himself out fighting the drag and the action of the rod, and you're just cranking him in as he's getting tired.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. Noah, do you have anything to add based on what Anthony shared?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, biggest thing, I know some people do get excited when they're fly lining and they get bit. So like what Anthony said, exaggerating that 3 count. If you're one of those people that you get excited, count to 5, because I know some people, they get bit, they go 1, 2, 3, and then boom, you didn't get bit. The bait's gone, you got to do it all over again. You worked hard, and then it all came for nothing. So if you know something like that, you could count to 5, but besides that, I think Anthony hit the nail on the head.
Thank you guys so much for your knowledge, Anthony. Appreciate you so much. Be sure to visit Fisherman's Access. They're fully loaded with everything you need to fill out your arsenal. We'll do this again, and until then, tight lines.